So the first thing I want to do before we get started, we've got a group of investors and entrepreneurs, some who have worn both hats at various times. So maybe we can just start directly to my left with you, Amit, and folks who just give a brief summary of what their background is.
Name's Amit Mukherjee. I work at NEA. We're one of the largest venture capital funds globally. We're investing in a $2.6 billion fund. We've made a lot of e-commerce investments, particularly here in New York. Some of our e-commerce investments are Groupon, where we're the first institutional investor, Modal Operandi, Guilt, and Y-Team, most recently Casper, which we're really excited about. We had the opportunity to partner with Phil about 3 or 4 months ago now. I'm really excited about that. We also made an investment in Jet.com, a relatively large investment for an early stage company, which is innovating on the shipping logistics of e-commerce and trying to build a big marketplace to attack Amazon. So we think a lot about the space, and I think there are a lot of exciting disruptions going on. And also, it's nicely with their strategy of having a large capital base and being able to fund companies through the life cycle. So we continue to be able to enter e-commerce and look at just the market size of $500 billion of retail spend and still single-digit penetration online, and we're extremely excited about it.
So my name is Krim. I'm one of the co-founders of CasperSleep.com. We're a vertically integrated online brand that's focused on the mattress and sleep product space. We launched in April with a mattress and are going to continue to come out with other products in the sleep space and are looking to change the way that consumers think about the way they shop for and buy mattresses.
I'm Matt Krna. I'm a partner at SoftBank Capital. We're a roughly $1 billion venture fund with offices here in New York, Boston, and the Silicon Valley. We do a fair amount of investing in the e-commerce space. We're investors in Guild Group here in New York. We're investors in a company called Chloe and Isabel, in a direct selling jewelry business here in New York, and a whole bunch of others. We're also, through SoftBank Corp, the largest investor in Alibaba, which is IPOing relatively soon. So that's awesome.
Hi, I'm Adam Kalamchi. I'm the founder of Brilliant Bicycles. We're a direct-to-consumer bicycle company. We sell simple, beautiful, and affordable bikes online. We offer in-home assembly and service. Essentially just trying to make it really affordable and easy to buy a bike, whereas most bike companies serve your kind of older white guy who shaves his legs and rides in Central Park in the morning. I just recently left RE, so switched from the venture side to the operating side.
Hey guys, I'm Spencer. I'm a general catalyst from the New York office for them. Done a decent amount of e-commerce investing over the course of the past 7 years. Did the seed investment in Birchbox, Series A in Bonobos, in a prior firm, and at GC involved a bunch of companies from Orrick to Chloe and Isabel to a handful of others in New York. Love doing work stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming. You might as well hang on to that mic, Spencer, because you had given the topic earlier, which I think is a great question to roll this out on. When we talk about having a panel on e-commerce, can be a whole bunch of things. And one of the things that Scott was talking about was Google's delivery service, which sounded just like, and I know Scott was around Internet 1.0, it sounded like Cosmo and Urban Fetch. Yeah, exactly. So we're dating ourselves, but everything old is new again. Now there's more penetration of people actually using online services or mobile services, and payment options, more comfort with security. But when we talk about e-commerce, should we define it, or should we try and list some characteristics? What are we really talking about here?
I think it's probably safest to have the most interesting debate to call e-commerce selling through the internet, probably. And that includes marketplaces. You can be a direct-to-consumer brand like these guys. You can be an online retailer like Guilt. You can, let's just keep it broad. Otherwise, I think we'll unnecessarily alienate business models and sectors. So.
Right, pretty brief fill it.
Yeah.
Right. I guess one of the questions might be, and maybe Philip, maybe you want to grab this one. Branded e-commerce. what brought you that? Why that model?
Yeah, we actually don't love the e-commerce title for our business because I think it implies that you maybe only sell through the internet. And we really look at building our business and our brand in kind of an omni-channel way. We're very young, so right now all of our sales do go through the internet, but we definitely see emerging brands leverage the offline experience to help grow their exposure, to help bring new people to their products, to their brand, and really help extend it. And to Amit's point earlier, the vast majority of all retail is still offline, and so I think there's a way to scale kind of internet-enabled or businesses that highly leverage their website and their e-commerce presence, but through a much broader way, both online and offline.
So, for example, in your business, did you start with an app, or did was it online first? Was it mobile first? Was it mobile enabled right off the bat?
Yeah, so we built a website. We built it on eCommerce, and it's a responsive design site. So it's one that the mobile experience, the tablet experience, and the online experiences are all responsive, but based on the same initial framework that we built. So we did not build a dedicated mobile app or anything like that.
Can I challenge you just to make it more provocative?
Of course.
I think you started with a great product.
We did.
I think, and that's got to be the foundation for whether you are a company like Scott's whose product is a digital product. Actually, innovation is a digital product. Where you're like these guys, and it begins with great physical product. And I think how you sell it doesn't matter unless you have a great product.
Well, I think how you sell it is how you tell your story, and I think the story has to involve a great product. I think that's like step one to building a brand, which is something that we're excited to do. So how people read your story on mobile is going to be different than on your website if you have a mobile app. Same with offline. So over Labor Day, we did a partnership with Uber to help expose our brand and our story to new people, and we had vehicles that were out in New York City just to get our team out there and to talk about what we were doing, how we were changing the mattress market and the sleep products category. And so we look at all of those different mediums as just different ways to tell our story and interact with people. And I think what's exciting for us is we're building a business that does leverage online, is that there's so many mediums to tell that story through social channels, through video, whether it's connecting with someone on Facebook or Twitter or using Vine or whatever it may be. There's just so many different storytelling mediums and so many ways to create content tailored for each of those channels that I think that's different than it's ever been for companies looking to scale a brand or an e-commerce business leveraging the internet.
Well, that's one of the terms that getting thrown around these days, right? Storytelling. Right, and you look at some of that, throw it out to anybody out there. Some examples that are working well, others, I think of some brands like Shinola or whatever, which is big story, beautiful design, big story, but if you look behind it, there's some questions about, the authenticity on the brand. So I'd be interested if any of the panelists sort of have thought about storytelling generally, or when it works, when it doesn't, how it works, how it doesn't. There's also, just the whole idea of content marketing.
Yeah, I mean, I think at 2 points. I think I see e-commerce really as just actually meeting a new business. All of the mature e-commerce companies are going offline, and simply when you're two guys and you have some product and not a lot of money, you throw up a Shopify site and you start to talk about what you're doing. And I think we've realized over time that most businesses will never exist purely online. So I think it's just the first, as Phil was saying, the first of many channels, and that's the power of the internet where it's just really cheap. I also think as we thought about our product versus some of these e-commerce companies that are out there, we can produce our product with a kind of modest number of SKUs with like 2 people. And I think that that's a huge advantage in e-commerce because the rest of your staff is actually just storytelling. And I think if you went and counted heads at Warby Parker, I think you'd probably count more people that are telling the Warby story and thinking about marketing and thinking about PR that are actually thinking about glasses. I think some of the other e-commerce companies are having trouble scaling are the companies that have floors and floors of people that are dedicated designers, graphics, whatever it is, buyers, merchants. And that's an offline business that's just sort of using e-commerce as a channel.
Interesting nuance about the process of storytelling that I've learned by working with Philip and these guys is that the market can only accept so much of the story at one time. So when Casper launched, it was really just this fun kooky brand and came in a box, and people focus on these aspects. And I said, hey, there's so many stories here that you're missing. This is a super high quality product at a lower price point. And then the mattress industry as a whole is totally backwards. It's a duopoly, and mattress sales are just easy. And there are all these aspects that I felt like these guys just weren't getting out there. And the response I got back from Casper, and from Luke in particular, who's one of the co-founders, was, hey, look, the market can only accept so much, so we're going to roll that story out over time. It takes a while for people to understand and digest it. So it's a really complex process. It's important, and ultimately, especially for these self-branded companies, that story is really what separates the first version that comes out from the second, because I think consumers at the end of the day really appreciate innovation, not only in terms of the product itself, but all the different elements and details around it. And I think telling that story and having that resonate with consumers is really important for the traction of these businesses.
Yeah, I mean, the story is important, and I think developing a brand persona that's honest, right, that is just one of the most important things, because there's so much noise out online today that ultimately you've got to find a way to cut through that. It has to be consistent, it has to be honest, it has to reflect the actual product. I think, oftentimes we'll see, we've got a great story, but the product doesn't reflect the reality, or the experience doesn't reflect the story that's being told, either from a consumer experience standpoint or from a product standpoint. And there's no coming back from that today. I think the social feedback loop is so strong online today that ultimately, if there's not a very strong linkage between the story and the actual product, it's death. And then there's the other aspect, which is there's a tension between storytelling for a brand and commerce and getting that done. Right? So there are people that are going to hit your site and want to transact. They've heard the story, they want to just get something done, and too much content is just going to sidetrack them. Versus others that are more at the top of the purchase funnel that you want to build awareness with, and they want to learn more about the brand, that may take a totally different path. So thinking about, when we look at e-commerce companies, we think a lot about how content is used, how content interplays with commerce on the site itself, and it gets even more complex and mobile when you have just not a lot of real estate to deal with. So I think it's a very challenging balance to hit sometimes.
That's one of the issues.
I was going to tell a really quick anecdote about this. So I mentioned a few companies that I had the privilege of working with in varying levels, some in New York, and I didn't mention one before, which I think made some very significant mistakes in this regard. It was a failed investment of mine in Europe called Stylist Pick, which is very similar to Shoe Dazzle in Europe. And basically this business's value proposition was for $40 a month, basically $40 a month, they would send you a new pair, I think just one, maybe a pair of shoes and an accessory or something like that. And the business model was great. You sign people up. The CEO is like a total machine, understood customer acquisition, unit economics like nobody else. And the business lasted for 16 months. And they optimized the shit out of it as much as they possibly could, except at the end of the day, their product sucked. Like the actual, the shoes were bad. They were bad shoes. And so the consumer would get their box, and maybe they'd stick around for a month or 2 months or 3 months, but the thing about the internet and the storytelling front that is super important is if your product sucks, information is incredibly liquid on the internet. And so, all you have to do is let down X number of customers, and X can be 10 or 12 or 15 in your business, and it just spreads like wildfire. And so that's why, I sort of hopefully kindly interrupted Philip, because his product is very, very good, and that has to be the core, I think, of what makes for an excellent business, because otherwise, just word gets out too quickly.
Yeah, one of the great ways to establish that, people have said omnichannel or omnichannel or whatever a couple times already on this panel, is the proliferation of sort of pop-up stores. Zany just recently launched another sort of New York-based company, and I think that was one of the first things that they did. And it seems to me, maybe that's the new playbook, or it's what we're saying. It's just you can't be, you can't just be online. You're never going to do that, and so I'd be interested in what people's thoughts are on the proliferation of pop-up stores, whether that whole, just the sort of customer acceptance of that as an idea, if that's anybody in e-commerce.
I think we've talked a lot so far in the first 10 minutes about story and brand and a lot of qualitative aspects. And I think pop-up store, you could think that it's a qualitative strategy too. Hey, we should be out. We should be in Soho. We should have a place that people can walk by and see that resonates with the brand. But you can actually be extremely rigorous about analyzing what your offline acquisition channels look like. And in a lot of cases, they're surprisingly really, really good. When you think about how much it costs to acquire a customer online or acquire a user on your mobile phone, it can be easily $30 to $100. And to compare that with acquiring a customer offline, you can hire someone to sit on a street corner for $10 an hour, and that might actually be a more effective channel for you. And I think that's what you're seeing a lot in these pop-up stores. Yeah, sure, it's on point from a brand and strategic perspective, but also even if you're very rigorous about the unit economics of the business, it's also a highly effective acquisition channel. And so when I hear people make the case for a pop-up store or offline acquisition, it usually makes a lot of sense, and it's not just because it's on brand, it's also because from an economics perspective, it's actually truly cost efficient too.
I think that's a great way to look at kind of the quantitative side of it. And candidly, at Casper, we're evaluating whether or not to do a pop-up. And we also look at it on kind of the qualitative side. Like, can we offer an experience that's truly differentiated from what's out there? We compete with mattress stores who haven't changed their model of interacting with customers in decades, and it's a very uninteresting and generally terrible experience. So we like to look at the economics of how do we drive people into the store and what that costs, but also can we just offer a differentiated experience that really helps extend our brand and our reach? Because I think pop-ups as a concept, like a retail concept, used to be interesting in and of itself, and used to be something that was press-worthy and that you saw brands get a lot of exposure around, and now consumers get it. You can do that. So how do you go to the next level, really offering some kind of experience or some kind of consumer interaction with your product or your brand that is truly unique and helps extend your story to a new group of consumers?
Well, sort of in that line, it's something that just didn't exist a while ago, or people had to assimilate that idea that, you got a pop-up store, rather than something like a flagship store that you have down in Manhattan or whatever, but rather a real, just a true pop-up. Hey, let people actually go lay on a mattress or whatever. I guess, one of my questions, maybe I'll put it to you, Adam. Is there anything that you think of, like you said, two employees, we can do an e-commerce business? What are some of the reasons behind it? Could you have done that 2 years ago, 3 years ago? And if not, what are the things that have changed, and what do you think are some of the things that are changing soon that really enable sort of proliferation of e-commerce?
Yeah, I think you could have done it 2 or 3 years ago. I think 5 or 6 years ago, I think Bonobos really pioneered starting purely online. I think the technology's gotten way better. Spree, and I also think that consumers get it. While it's very cliche, the war be for this, or when you launch, people know where to put you mentally. They'll say, great, someone's now disintermediating a new industry. I trust them. I totally get the business model. I think the way we think about pop-ups, or just how do we reach customers, is essentially a spectrum of capital intensity. So launching a Shopify basically takes no capital. And then you can do some collaborations, and the capital you really need is simply inventory. And then you can do pop-ups, and we'll probably do a lot of this, which is get a food truck or brand a small vehicle. And for us, it's go to the customers who are in the parks. And then maybe it's pop-up retail space for 3 months, and then it's full retail. So I think what's changed is people have explored each step along this path, and some people have gone too far and gone out of business, and some people have done it out of order. I think there's a pretty set playbook where you can look at stores and know what the arc of your race path and sort of your rollout footprint will be.
Yeah, and I think Adam makes a great point in that there's a lot of ways where you could see building something out, but there are now more ways where you can test before you invest a ton of money, whether that's online, starting with a Shopify site, before you build something that's truly custom, designed exactly for what you need, or Orrick talked about how they built their own POS system after they saw the limitations of what was out there, or with retail, before you go sign a multi-year lease with a big capital investment, you can test the concept, you can test different concepts through pop-ups. So I think what's exciting is that there are a lot of very meaningful ways for the business that you can learn about very quickly through some pretty low-cost, iterative testing, both online and offline.
Yeah, well, there's something more fundamental, I think, also going on, which is from the consumer standpoint. Over the last 5-10 years, maybe a little bit more, I think consumers, the end consumer, has sought out a much more bespoke model, more unique goods, things that the consumer's gotten maybe more risk-seeking or risk-accepting in terms of buying new products from emerging suppliers or vendors. So I think that that's kind of changed, and I think that's also driven a lot of these new vendors to come online. I think the volume of venture money that's gone after these models has funded a lot of these new models, and at the end of the spectrum, you've seen a lot of the underlying infrastructure start to emerge to support these players. So it's everything from Shopify and Volusion, BigCommerce, and e-commerce platforms, to logistics providers and 3PLs, to actually manufacturers that are more and more willing to take on risk of working with small and emerging companies. So for instance, when I started in this business 10 plus years ago, we would have startup companies that would want to manufacture stuff in China and work with guys like Flextronics, and Flex was, they were saying, call us when you're a $100 million company, please. You guys are way too small. And we were investors in Fitbit, which is classified as one of these emerging consumer products companies. And guys like Flextronics have been seeking them out and are exceptionally supportive of those kinds of companies with the expectation they can grow very, very fast. So I think stemming from, consumer demand, which has changed a lot fundamentally, all the way through the very kind of fundamental level of the supply chain, you've seen a lot of really interesting changes that have gone on to support these kinds of business models and make them possible.
I mean, why would you start offline if you have a new product today, a consumer product? The reach is limited. It's hard to get in the retail stores. I think you'll see from this point on 90% of new consumer products start online first, and obviously they're going to sell online too, and they'll move offline. But if if I've got my entrepreneur hat on, I would start online 90% of the time, unless I'm sort of one specific type of product for one specific demographic where retail makes sense. But I think this is the way of the future. It's not just some trend. It's every single new retail product is probably going to be an online business.
I'd offer two things. One that changed, I think, over the course of the past few years, to answer your first question, which is, I also think the real estate market has changed. I think property developers, property owners are more familiar with this pop-up retail concept. They're more comfortable with having 5, 6, 7 logos on a door over the course of a year, and the successes are revitalizing neighborhoods. They're making public transit interesting where it used to be a barren ground, stuff like that. So I think that helps to have more options if you're an emerging brand in prime real estate areas. And then the other thing that I think is a longer trend, which Matt sort of touched on, but I'd like to highlight it in a different way. He said that consumers are sort of getting more risk-taking and more interested in sort of niche products and stuff like that. I think that's true, but I also think it's sort of complemented by the power of the internet, which is to say you can be a small, shoe brand in Berlin, and you can throw up a pop-up store in London, which gets you some press, and that press gets somebody to write a news article about you, which some people in New York read, and all of a sudden your biggest market in the world is in New York City or in the United States. And I think that that the internet has always been a champion of the niche. And I think that's a lot of, I think we're just finally tasting the promise of the internet. It's great products will thrive as a result of the information fluidity. So.
Well, and I do want to open this up for questions, so, but yeah, well, I'm sitting here, so I'm going to ask this, but in just a moment. Okay, that's all great. And this is directed mainly to the VCs on the panel. You guys make money by investing in rocket ships, not lifestyle businesses or lemonade stands, right? How do you tell? Or can you tell?
I'll go first. So as I started, we begin with product, and every single e-commerce company that we look at, to Scott's point, he actually mentioned this in his talk, we look very closely at things like Net Promoter Score, and look really at sort of the level of how vibrant the community is associated with the product in a somewhat analytical way, and we try to be consistent. That's the nice thing about NPS. So it begins there, and then we get more financial and get into some of the stuff. But I do think for us that's the place to start. Sorry, one last thing to say. It depends on what stage you're investing in. So as early stage investors, that's where we start.
Yeah, I think it's ultimately driven by market size. If you've got a very, very large market that has not been really addressed, or is not being addressed by incumbents in in a really rational or new way that takes advantage of a lot of the power of the internet and mobility and all these other new tools that we have, I think that's a market that kind of screams out for a venture backable play versus something that is more of a lifestyle business, as you said, David. I think it's always a question on our minds, especially in early stage investing when you don't yet have the benefit of metrics and things like that. But on the later stage side, really the better question is what's a sustainable business rather than what's a lifestyle business, because there is a lot of money flowing into the segment as we've all seen. A lot of companies continue to exist based on the influx of venture money. Scott quoted to me earlier, in terms of lifetime value, no one knows what it is, but everyone lies about it, I think was what you said. So, no one, everyone is buying customers with the expectation they're going to come back X number of times over Y number of years, but it's frequently these companies haven't been around long enough to really establish what a real LTV is for a mainstream customer, not a first adopter customer, and that's often very hard to tease apart for us, and that's one of our recurring challenges.
So we look at really sort of three different pillars of e-commerce success. So the first is is this a proprietary product or experience? Because if it isn't, you can expect price comparison to lower your margin down to a point where you can't compete, because you have to compete with companies like Amazon, which are succeeding at a zero cash flow for the foreseeable future. So we look for proprietary product or experience in some way. The second is you mentioned LTV already, right? You can break that down into the individual components of it. So we look at all those different components and understand that it's a different story for what they should be for the type of product. So you look at, average order value, gross margin, you look at repeat order rate, and all those things can flux up and down depending on what the product is. So, for Casper, for example, we felt comfortable that this is sort of an episodic buy because of the high average order value, the high margins, and even though this wasn't sort of like a repeat rate business, because we sort of looked at all those different components, we said, hey, it doesn't really matter that, meals are bought 40 times and the mattress is bought once, because the economics of the mattress are so good. And then the third thing we look at is cash conversion cycle, because if you have a bad cash conversion cycle where you're investing heavily in inventory before you make sales, your money goes half as far as an investor, right? Because if you give them $10 million, then they've got to spend $5 million on inventory and also $5 million on marketing. Whereas if they've got a positive cash conversion cycle, then that money can be paid out after the sale occurs, right? So you have to look at all those things, and obviously also qualitative factors like market, team, those dynamics. So we try to look at all those things together, and having looked at a bunch of them, you sort of just make a judgment call on what makes sense and what doesn't. But there's a lot of different elements to it, which is why investing in e-commerce can be very challenging.
Happy to open it up.
Yeah, this is really addressed to Adam. So, Warby Park comment is what prompted this. Let's assume that the pop-up is successful, and you look at crystal balls 3 years from now. Are you hybrid? Do you have brick and mortar stores?
Question. I'm just going to repeat your question for folks on the directed to entrepreneurs on the panel. With respect to your brands, if the pop-up stores are successful, do you see yourself essentially being a retailer if you cycle out a few years?
I mean, for us, definitely. I think you have to be in person. We produce bikes. It's a bunch of steel tubes, it's some rubber. There are hundreds of millions produced every year. So the only way we're a successful long-term company is if we have a brand, we tell a story, and people prefer to buy our bikes when they can also go down the street. Because we will be at a differentiated price point, but someone else can also eventually do this. And I think retail is an important part of that, being in person in big cities where there is density, but being able to talk to people in person and have the personality come out through the brand.
Yeah, and I think we look at pop-ups as just a way to test what offline looks like. And so if you can prove that offline works, then certainly a permanent fixture there would make sense. But it's going in with an open mind that we don't know what about it will resonate. We don't know what about it is important to customers. So is it more of a showroom model where you just put product and you can see the product and still ship it from your national distribution centers? Is it something where people do want inventory and are coming in because they want to pick it up and they're just last minute shopping? There's a lot of questions that we go into it with, and we use pop-ups as an inexpensive way to kind of test some of those theories, and then knowing that hopefully we get smarter about it before we do invest fully into an offline retail experience.
And I'd build on one of Spencer's points is the innovation in the real estate market actually potentially helps us get into retail because we're a seasonal product. And if we could sign a 6-month lease and always be in the summers, we would do it much faster than if we have to sign a full year lease and a multi-year lease. So the ability to sign those is actually going to change our path.
Sure.
I'm just curious, so when I think about e-commerce, obviously the payment experience is integral to that. So on that topic, just touching on cryptocurrencies for a second, what are your thoughts on how that fits in the landscape and how that will fit in the future? Because obviously now you're seeing a lot of successful companies like Coinbase and Overstock. So is your view that this will sort of be integral, so I can pay with debit, credit, or Bitcoin, or do you think that this is going to be an afterthought for these successful investments?
We definitely think payments are a huge opportunity to continue to evolve our experience with customers and offer them the ability to check out however they want to check out. Particularly with our product, we have a very high ticket value, and so we work with a company called Affirm, which is Max Selection startup that's really changing the way that you offer financing and mobile payments, and it's really exciting, I think, from the consumer standpoint to see innovation and disruption come to what has been a very staid industry and staid process. And then, we get excited with what Apple's doing and NFC, and there's just a ton of innovation coming, which just makes the purchase that much less friction and that much easier for consumers, especially at large ticket items or online or offline.
I actually have some reservations about cryptocurrency in general and how fast it's going to evolve and become part of the e-commerce ecosystem. I think it might be more of a 20 to 30 year cycle rather than a 5 to 6 year cycle. So I think there's a lot of hype about it now, but there's a lot of regulation that needs to be done, and there's a lot of sort of geopolitical factors that go into starting a new sort of global currency. If all of a sudden the U.S. can't use monetary policy, they're going to be there's going to be a huge political reaction to that. In terms of actually sort of regulating this, there's sort of cryptocurrency banks that have just disappeared into thin air right now, right? So, when I think about e-commerce and all the stuff that's going on, there's, I think, a couple markets that I think are going to thrive before cryptocurrency does, and I sort of think about them relatively separately. I think of cryptocurrency as a different technology that I'm wrapping my head around. And so I think the areas in e-commerce where we might see innovation before that are first around shipping logistics, and then secondly around sort of these offline services that are coming on, sort of things like Handybook or meal delivery and stuff like that. I think those will come before the cryptocurrency really disrupts the e-commerce ecosystem.
Yeah, I think I'd add on to that. I think one thing that you touched on was friction. Right? You want to make it as frictionless as possible for consumers to pay really any way they want to pay. So if cryptocurrencies take off, I would imagine that integrating those as a checkout option, e-commerce sites would not be anything more than fairly trivial at some point. I'm sure there'll be first adopters that want to do that, but to me today it's more of a gimmick. I think more of the innovation and interesting stuff that's going on in payments has to do with installment payments, credit, especially for higher ticket items. And we've seen a lot of interesting companies focused around how you offer credit intelligently to consumers very, very quickly based on data patterns and those kinds of things, where you're giving consumers that may not have had the ability to pay for an item like a mattress or a car or some other high ticket value item to do so without having to go through all these steps of applying for loans and all these other things is, I find that to be a pretty interesting area right now in commerce payments.
Time for one more. Tom Goodwin just wrote an article on TechCrunch about how the internet is destroying profits in the sense that wide distribution, there's layers of commerce happening. As far back as you can go on the value chain, profits and prices are going to be eroded. I wanted to get your thoughts on at what point does e-commerce hurt the original supplier in China that's helping to create some of the products that we're buying now? And is there a scenario where e-commerce positively disrupts the entire vertical chain?
I'll say that the internet adds transparency, and to the extent that you're selling commodity products, and it brings the profit there down to zero, which is why Amit made the good point that if you have defensibility around what you're selling, if it's a proprietary product that you developed in-house, and if you have IP around that it helps prevent you from commoditizing your product or your product mix. And so I think you see Amazon bring a lot of marketplaces to zero with profits because they have the scale and transparency and reach. And so I think that's why you have to think very carefully about what products you're bringing online and how you're selling them, and how you continually stay ahead of your competition with the products that you develop under your brand.
I think, arguably every single product that exists is at risk of commoditization from suppliers and manufacturers in China. And I think ultimately, you rely on brands, you rely on continual innovation to keep you ahead of that curve. But ultimately, listen, Alibaba sold $248 billion worth of stuff last year. And that is not going to be decreasing anytime soon. And I expect that the U.S. is on their is on their roadmap. And so the interface between Chinese manufacturer or low-cost manufacturer, Chinese I use more as an example, but any low-cost manufacturer and the end consumer is collapsing. So whereas 20 years ago you had consumer and retailer and distributor and manufacturer, that's coming closer and closer, and collapsing into one, I think, over time. And so, for commodity products, it's going to be a very, very tough sell. So unless you're, someone described it once, the definition of a brand is when Nickelodeon can take a pencil that sells for 5 cents and put Nickelodeon on it and sell it for 50 cents. That's a brand. So unless you have that kind of powerful brand to consumers, or you have a product that's just very, very innovative and that you can keep iterating on, it's going to be tough. It's going to get tougher and tougher.
Yeah, I'd agree with both of those comments. And I'd just say, to highlight the power of the internet and how it helps, you just look at the industries that it transforms that were offline. And look at, the ability to eliminate stores in many cases, the ability to simplify supply chains, to take, grocery stores that operate at like razor thin margins, and you look at what some of these new food businesses are able to do in those markets. It's really special. And will there be pressure on those businesses through the internet? Yes. Amazon and Google are going to put pressure on them, and that's going to be tough. But the good news is I think the winners are the consumers. And so as long as we're all either on the venture side or more importantly on the entrepreneurial side, hungry enough and ambitious enough to keep pushing brands and innovation, the internet's just been a tremendous boom for consumers. Won't stop.
Well, on that note, I want to thank our panelists. That was excellent. Very much appreciated. We're going to take a 10-minute break.